So we sold against what customers hate about brokerages. And so we pretty much set up MoLo's philosophy around everything that people hate about brokerages, and we were going to do the opposite.
Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I am your host, Blythe Brumleve. I am happy to welcome in brand new guest to the show, and that's Stephan Mathis. He is a former co-founder of MoLo. You've probably heard of them, and now he is a current free agent. So we are going to be talking all about sales, marketing yourself, entrepreneurial journey within the freight broker business, and what the horizon sort of looks like in the future, and some sales and marketing tips for those brokers if you were to get started today. So, Stephan, welcome to the show.
Yes, thanks for having me. I've been a big fan. I've been watching you from afar, and it's cool to be on an episode. So
heck yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I was actually just listening to give the audience a little bit of background. We officially met in Nate Schutz. He has the Ballast Group, which is for logistics founders. Fantastic group. Go check out their website in case you are a logistics founder or maybe interested in it. And it's a great community. It's really like a safe space to sort of share our struggles and our wins and achievements and things like that, but mostly struggles. But that's where we met. We got connected and had to get you on the show. And before, I have you on, I was listening to your interview on the Real Freight Talk podcast, which is I don't want to say a fairly new podcast, but kind of is. I think they're about 30 episodes in, it was great stuff, great conversation. And during your, when you were explaining your background a little bit, I thought it was funny that for the overwhelming majority of us, when we get into freight, we just do it by happenstance, or we have a family member that's already working in the business. And that was the same for you, right?
yeah, and I mean, I think that's fun. Like, some people go to college for it, they study supply chain or whatnot. For me, I just stumbled into it accidentally. And then my family lineage actually got into it too. My younger sister had worked at MoLo for a little while, and so did my cousin Miles. He's at Spot Freight in Indianapolis. But like, it's just it spirals into like you didn't know about it before, and then eventually your friends and like, what's this? What? And everyone starts like, that's cool. Like, I'm into that. Like, I'll try that career out. And yeah, I wasn't expecting to do 13 years in brokerage, but here I am.
And so did you join Coyote? So you were part of the initial Coyote team, or the early days before UPS, acquired them. But did you work at any other freight positions before that, or Coyote was your first gig?
Coyote was my first one. Before that, I was a valet manager at a country club and parking cars and shaking hands with members. That's what I did. And I got my first interview at Coyote. I think I was 22, maybe 23, and saw the fun vibes of a brokerage and all the energy. And I'm like, I could do this. Like, let's sell some freight. I didn't even know what the most I knew about a truck was that it had 18 wheels. Like, that was it. I had no idea what a broker was. I thought everybody owned their trucks. Yeah. Looking back,
so what did I guess that initial process look like? Like, how you're going from being a valet manager and you're starting the early days with Coyote. You have no idea about the industry. So what does that, I guess, sort of that training process look like to get familiar with the industry in order to be able to sell it effectively?
Yeah, so that was in 2011, and at that time, Coyote was a rising star. I think CH was a big on the scene back then. Echo, Command. There was a few other bigger players. That TQL, and Coyote was the hot new startup to work at in Chicago. Everybody wanted to work there. Day one, you get into a classroom style training program with 20 other kids that are fresh out of college, and it is information overload of freight terms, carrier, customer, everything. I felt like I was, like almost in like a study hall, like of every day you went there 8 to 5, learning freight terminology and just getting trained to be on the floor.
So give us a sense of like, how big was Coyote at that point? You mentioned that it's the startup that everybody wanted to go work for. I remember working in a brokerage, and I was an executive assistant. And when I was tasked with redoing our website, I was sent the Coyote website in order to say, just do this. And here I am. I have no idea what I'm doing, but a lot of our early marketing strategy was based off Coyote.
Yeah, I don't want to misspeak. I was an entry-level employee. I would assume it was pre being $1 billion company at that point. But, I think they had just gone through a logo change. They switched from Lake Forest to downtown Chicago in Logan Square. But I remember the year after that, the market took off, and they had a hiring spree of like 500 people. So that was like, whoa, we could actually grow this thing, and seeing the opportunities. Like, it's exciting when you're part of a company that's like, wait, this thing's going to take off. Like, that energy, you want to be a part of that. And it makes you feel good that you picked the right place to work too.
And so when you're going through all of this training process, for a lot of training programs, I think TQL in particular, they almost overtrain you and throw everything at you in order to sort of wash out the weak and keep the strong. At what moment when you're going through this training process, or maybe even starting to work in the job, did you say, this is something I could actually stick with for a while?
Yeah, good question. I actually struggled with the training program, just being honest, because it was a lot of information overload and tests and all. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm not the greatest test taker, but I can figure things out as I go when I get in the mix. And that's when I usually do my best work. So, but man, can you repeat the question?
Sure. I guess, what was that catalyst moment that you were going to say, I'm staying here. Yes. I'm made for this.
The relationship piece of being a carrier sales rep. Once I hit what's called Hot Pod, where you graduate from training, I got through it. But you go through Hot Pod, where you learn how to hit the phones and talk to carriers and book freight for about 8 weeks. And my relationship, customer service background, being able to talk to members at the country club. I was a pizza delivery guy back when I was 18, 19 years old. So just being able to like be personable with people allowed my personality to come out on the phone. So it became more natural to like be doing the work versus like learning the work. Like I learned by doing, which I would say most people probably do, but some people love to like see it, read it, and like remember it. And I'm more of a like, give me the phone, like I'll figure this thing out. So I remember talking to carriers in Hot Pod and like being able to like make relationships really quickly and build trust. And if you worked in this industry long enough, you know that you're only as good as your name and trust and how you treat people. I didn't know that as a 22-year-old that I needed that, but that was the attribute that allowed me to build strong relationships and become an excellent carrier sales rep. I did refrigerated sales at Coyote for 5.5 years. At one point, me and some of the top guys, we still argue about it today, who was running the most reefer freight. I think I had number one for a year or so, but someone else will tell me that they were the best rep, but I don't know. I think I had it for a little while.
So what is one part of the process that I've always been fascinated with is the initial outreach in order to get a customer. Does that look, is it just repeated phone calls? Are you pulling their email off Zoom info? Hoping to sort of break the ice with them? What does that sort of initial contact to building a relationship with a customer look like?
Well, I would say I learned most of that at MoLo. So Coyote, just to clarify, I did all carrier there. I didn't do any customer exposure at all. I was super raw at MoLo. When we initially started, I actually was selected to be a part of MoLo with my carrier acumen to be able to help build our carrier network out. But I had a little pit stop between Coyote and MoLo where I had landed a customer and gotten one onboarded. And so I kind of understood at least the process. And when we got to MoLo, I shifted quickly to going straight customer because we needed a few customers to get launched, right? Like when you start a brokerage, like it doesn't matter who's doing the work you're doing. If you don't have a customer to give you loads, like you're you're not doing anything. So I had a couple relationships to start MoLo. And then we all kind of made a decision like, hey, we got to divide and conquer from the early days. And so I went full blown customer. I didn't know everything perfectly on how to land new shippers because I never was trained on it, right? Like I just did carrier sales, which is a lot more learn on the go. But what I realized was that if I could mirror my same type of relationship mentality with carriers and make a customer comfortable wanting to work with me and bet on me, it doesn't matter if I don't say it right or email it right. I can get them to trust me as their sales rep and make them feel comfortable in giving us a shot. And so, again, because I wasn't polished in like the perfect strategy, I was like, I'm going to be relatable and like let this person get to know me, and I'm going to be vulnerable. I might even say, hey, I'm new to customer sales. This is a new venture for me, but I took care of my carriers better than anybody. And if they're the ones that are hauling your freight, and if they trusted me and I ship 600 truckloads a month, all refrigerated, chances are I could probably figure out how to move your freight as a customer sales rep, right? Like, and so I would always use whatever I could to, whatever tools I had in the chest to land the customer. And that was like, you start figuring out what's working, what's not, trial and error. You make dumb mistakes, you say stupid things, but eventually you start getting in a rhythm of like, customers are responding to such and such. They don't like these things, and you do less of what doesn't work and more of what works, right? That was my first year and a half, 2 years at MoLo.
And so take me, let's back it up a little bit to, I guess, the other catalyst of leaving Coyote in order to co-found MoLo. What does that process look like? Was it, a decision that you came to over time, or was it, sort of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it next month?
No, yeah, good question. I've always been someone that looks at my life or my career as, am I still growing, or have I reached my like peak and I can't go any higher here? And so when I got to what I considered the highest level of carrier sales, I was like, I'm not learning anything else more here. I need to go challenge myself to do something else. And so I left right around the UPS acquisition time. I felt like maybe the company might change and become a little bit more corporate-y, and I loved the like privately held, like we get to do our own thing here, and I didn't want the changes to affect how I was already doing my job. But two, I was like, if I'm ever going to bet on myself and grow, I got to leave. And so I had a small pit stop at a very small brokerage. I don't even know if they're in business anymore to this day, but it was like the first time that I've truly bet on myself. It was like, I'm going to take what I've learned and see if I can do something bigger. And by taking that leap of faith, I became a free agent, and that's how I found the MoLo opportunity. Because so MoLo was founded by Andrew Silver and Matt Vogrich. They're like friends from Lake Forest. Jeff Silver, Andrew Silver. Everybody kind of knows that story a little bit. And so, because I was outside the walls of Coyote, I found the opportunity. Andrew had reached out to me. He was like, I think you would be a good fit to be one of our first few employees at MoLo. Like, would you want to jump on this ship with us? And so I was like, yeah, I'm in. What do you, and he explained like he wanted to make this a thing, a big, big company. We're going to build it out. And I remember standing in my kitchen in Chicago. I had an opportunity to work at Amazon Freight. I think I was courting Uber Freight at the time, and one other company in the suburbs. And then I had we didn't have a name. It was just, we're going to build a brokerage. You want to be a part of it? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I just jumped on it. So that's how I found MoLo. But it was more, I think everything happens for a reason, to be honest.
So when you are entertaining these other offers, I mean, I imagine this is also the days where like social media is kind of in its early infancy. How are you building these relationships with some of these outsiders at other brokerages in order to start up a new one? Is it, are you keeping tabs with each other on social media? Is it kind of just word of mouth? Like, what does that, I guess, early digital networking look like?
So I think other people relate to this, but like Coyote had this like vibe of a lot of companies were stealing Coyote employees. Like they wanted like, oh man, like they had so much growth. So former Coyotes would go to another company and then they would start hiring more of them. And so this was around 2016, 2017. And I think at that point, social media was definitely taking off. It wasn't where it is today, but recruiters, right? Like they would reach out to you on LinkedIn or seeing what you want to do next, or based on your experience, you might be a good fit for X. So some of those offers came there, but some of it was like I saw someone that I knew at Coyote who maybe is working at a different company, and I was like, oh, okay. So tell me about that. Why did you go there? Like, do you like it there? Like, you're trying to find your next home. But for me, there was a little bit of, I like the fear of the unknown, and I'm also scared of it. So there's like jumping and the oh shit moment, like, man, so I decided to risk it all and go to startup. We don't have anything. We don't have a name. We don't have an office, nothing, but this sounds more fun. And I remember saying to myself, like, in 3 years, if this doesn't work, I can go take one of those other jobs. I have enough experience. So why don't I bet on myself and jump on the unknown? And so that's why I went to MoLo.
Yeah, it's definitely the entrepreneurial mindset is strong with you. And so, as you're, looking around the room, I guess, as the MoLo is starting to get built, what does, I guess, sort of the team structure look like? I imagine everyone's wearing a ton of hats and doing all of the things. And I guess, how does that start and then evolve from there?
Yeah, I mean, picture thinking of how to start a company from scratch. Like, you don't have the systems, you don't have the processes, nobody knows the right thing to be doing at the right time, but there's a collective sense of like, hey, we're going to build this company, and we know kind of like what you need to do, but you don't know the order of things you need to do it in. You need to get a DAT license, you need to get computers, desks, you got to have credit and all the like requirements to get a company running. But yeah, we were raw. We didn't know everything perfectly. Me, Matt, and Will for the first year were kind of running point on MoLo. Matt had a really strong business acumen from his days at IBM supply chain. Will and I had worked at Coyote together, so we were kind of the more hustle the freight type guys, like get everything, whatever it takes to get that done. And then there were several other really important early MoLo employees that came over and jumped on board. We had Emily Madden was in operations. Ricky Cabrado worked as one of our first carrier sales reps. Blake McClimates, he's at RFX now. He was, I think, employee number 5 or 6, and he booked freight and did a bunch of things, wore a ton of hats. But really, there is no right or wrong way to do it when you're starting from not having a script. You just assemble enough like hustle and bustle type people that we're going to do this thing and we're going to figure it out. And that was most of it. I remember wearing several different hats, answering the phones, cutting comm checks at nights, interviewing, buying the supplies for the offices, building tables, hanging TVs, tech guy. Like, you do everything in the beginning. Now, hindsight, you learn you could probably have done it way differently and better and more efficient, right? Like, you always learn from your mistakes, but part of the hustle and bustle and that's what makes it fun. Like, you don't know, and you're just going to go forward. And as you get successes, then you start like rinsing and repeating or figuring out what works, what doesn't work. But eventually we got to a point, I think a few months in, we were like, okay, we kind of have like somewhat of a rhythm. We have a few customers, we're moving some freight. We need to divide and conquer. Like, who's going to do what? And that's kind of where we had a discussion. It was like, hey, we think you could be really good at customer sales. Why don't you go be the first customer sales rep? And so I took that on and had to learn it and had to sell a brand that wasn't established in the industry at the time. There was 18,000 brokerages. And I'm sure a newer brokerage now, or someone has been open for 2 years, we went through the same process of like, they don't even know who you are. You're reaching out. They're like, yeah, we have plenty of carriers. We don't need you. Or you've only been in business for one year, why would we work with you? Like, we've never heard of you, all of that. Like, we had to fight through that and sell through why we were going to be different, competing against the household names, right? Like, and that's in and of itself, being able to sell when you're not an established brand is very challenging. So I can relate to anyone who's in the early stages of like how the challenges of, and then thinking about the market. Even today, it's a down market. So finding a way to get customers to give you some attention. But we went through all of those phases. MoLo wasn't like a perfect company that we had everything. We ran a script and it was like $0 to $600 million. Like we had our mistakes, but we did a lot of things right, I think, too.
I mean, clearly you did a lot of things right, but I'm more curious as to how you sort of, it was almost like the brick by brick, comparison of building up those customers. How did you make a customer, or I guess help a customer trust you when you're relatively unknown?
Yeah, great question. So we sold against what customers hate about brokerages. And so we pretty much set up MoLo's philosophy around everything that people hate about brokerages, and we were going to do the opposite. And so that means like accepting all our freight, never changing rates, treating our carriers great, always following through on our commitments. Whereas like at that time, like larger brokerages could kind of get away with some of that stuff if like they'd been in a network for a long time for a shipper and they are a household name, like they could change rates or this or that. And we were like, we have to do things better than everybody and like do it to an A+ level if we want to compete with these larger brokerages. So we started putting out that type of energy out into the world. Now, granted, is that sustainable forever? No, it's not. It's not sustainable forever to be keeping every single customer in the industry happy at all given times. Like you're going to go nuts doing that. But there was a period where shippers were really frustrated with the level of service that they were getting from brokerages. And so we were like, why don't we be just the anti-broker and be the one that does everything by the book? And that type of energy took us to year 5, probably. Honestly, like until this day, we still do everything by the book, but now you kind of understand the customer's expectations and how they play the game. And like you have relationships where, shippers want you to come back and change rates if it's like you're going to be in the, like it's a little bit more different now, whereas before it was more black and white. So we were able to use that to our advantage for sure.
And so you have this history of carrier sales, you evolve it into customer sales, and it's just you doing the customer sales initially. When was that moment when you started to, add more members to the customer sales team? And what did that look like? You had gone through rigorous training over at Coyote. So I guess maybe what are the lessons that you learned there that you were starting to bring into MoLo as you guys were growing?
Yeah, and I'll clarify there. I wasn't the only customer sales rep. We had others. It was one of those things where everybody sells in the beginning. Like,
yeah, very
if you're
true.
Starting a company from the ground up, like if you had access to someone who was at a shipper that could potentially give us freight, like you're on the phone with them. Like if it's your brother's cousin's mom who works at CDW who could get you a convo with a shipper, you're taking that call, and your title might not be customer sales manager, but you're going to figure out a way to get that in the hands to somehow get freight. So we all wore that. It wasn't, by me by any means, but I was like one of the first ones to say like, I'm going the enterprise sales customer route. And I think Andrew had come on after, I think a year later, and he had a ton of customer sales experience running offices at Coyote and, just being exposed to it on a high level there. So that also put it through fuel on the fire too, with his extensive customer sales background. And so that allowed us to kind of get even more of the brand and culture and push forward to finding our differentiator in the market and getting customers to believe in us.
How do you differentiate yourself in a brokerage market?
Man, that's such a good question. On paper, everybody looks the same. And that's the old adage. That's why it's very challenging for a shipper to decide who is the right broker to use, because what do you measure them by? Typically, what we found was customers would buy into working with us after we had proved ourselves for somebody else. That's just the nature of it. Like, you haul really well for Aldi, and Aldi says, yeah, you guys are good. And then Aldi says, hey, Kraft, MoLo's good, we use them. And then Kraft's like, yeah, you should use them, Walmart. And then Walmart's like, yeah. And it's like, we kind of had to sell that way. When you're not a household name, like, you need someone speaking on your behalf, which that I highly recommend getting recommendations or word of mouth, or someone saying something good about you, because the reality is the differentiators are very few and far between in our industry. Everybody says they do the same thing. We pick up all our loads, we deliver them on time, we have all the tech, we have this, we have that, we have you're like, every shipper at this point has heard all the sales pitches possible. So like, how do you truly differentiate? And I've been even on the point where, like, I sold customers by saying, we're not any different. I'm not going to sell you anything differently than someone else does. But what I'm going to do is, like, I'm a really good sales rep. I manage X amount of business. I run $100 million worth of freight, and we were at 96% on time delivery last year. Would you want to work with someone who has that type of track record? Take a shot on me. Like, you can kind of, like, just simplify it. Like, yeah, I'm not reinventing the wheel. We are a broker, and we're between trucks and customers. And do you need someone that gives you good service and you want to work with me? Like, that was kind of at the end what it was for me, my sales pitch. But yeah, I would not try to sell the differentiator at this point, because shippers are so bogged down from that.
Yeah, I imagine what's a little surprising as you were talking is that, you know, these shippers like Aldi, for example, hey Kraft, you should, work with them. I would almost think from a business perspective that Aldi would want to protect their own transportation solutions and not give that referral to bigger customers that, that might want to, steal some of that capacity away or steal some of that talent away. Was it easy to get referrals? It kind of sounds like it was a little bit easy to get those word of mouth referrals from those different customers.
Well, and I don't even know if those were the right names. I was throwing them out, but like, when you are good and you do exactly what you say you will do for a given amount of time, and then other people don't do that, like, you set yourself apart. Mm-hmm. And so we always tried to paint the picture of, like, okay, we're not as big as CH or Coyote or Arrive or any of these other ones that are ahead of us that have way bigger market share, way bigger teams, way better. So how can we compete with them? Well, we can compete by making our scorecard look like we're number 1 or 2 or 3 on that, and they're on number 8 or 9 or whatever. And so any way we could paint the picture that, like, look at this, like, we are beating other people that you see as, like, you give way more freight to. So you're constantly trying to find a way to paint the picture in their eyes that you should be someone that they should be working with. And that's, yeah. And you can't argue against facts. Like, that's a fact. Like, a broker will say, we're good at this, or we service better than everybody, but maybe showing a scorecard or your tender acceptance, or those are things that are real, that happened, that someone who's sitting in a logistics manager position might look at, and they could be like, okay, well, that's a real thing that I can now gauge you on. And so we tried using whatever we could, whether it was scorecards or reviews or recommendations or storytelling, which, like, I've talked about a lot, and I know some other people have mentioned it. If you're not storytelling in this industry, you are, like, living in the Stone Age, because everybody knows that it won't go perfectly in logistics. There's always going to be hurdles and things you have to overcome. But that's, like, literally what the person on the other side of the phone wants to know about you, or how you handled an adverse situation, so that they can put themselves in the shoes of the person who you solved the problem for previously, and they can, like, they can resonate with that. And so, again, like, kind of going back to what I started with in the beginning, I didn't have a perfect salesmanship. I didn't go through a customer sales training where they tell you exactly how to do things, but I did figure out on what people buy on, and they buy on trust. They buy on storytelling, believing in what you're saying, believing in your mission, reviews, recommendations, because those are things that like they can see and like pick up on. Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? And so that conviction you start getting as a sales rep, the longer you sit in the seat and you actually prove to yourself that you are going to do exactly what you're saying you're doing. And you become more and more confident when you don't take the like easy route of giving freight back or re-rating it or failing on loads or doing the kind of negative broker, attributes. So that starts to build momentum into like, you have easier conversations with shippers.
Yeah, I think one really important thing that you just talked about was the storytelling aspect and almost explaining the pain points to maybe shipping managers who have no idea or maybe have a very good idea of what some of them pain points are going to be and helping them to avoid them. Do you have any? You mentioned that storytelling should be a crucial part, or you kind of hinted to it that it should be a crucial part in your selling. Do you have any kind of like favorite story moments that you told a customer and it worked out well for you?
Yes. And so this story, it's a true story, and it actually was a very challenging situation. And so I onboarded a very large food and beverage shipper, let's say. And, I sold them for 3 years to get our shot in, right? And like enterprise sales, like you got to be able to have some patience, because it might take you a long time to get into a really large shipper. And so I just want to say that really quick. Like I see a lot of sales reps that don't have the patience to wait that long to get their shot at like a mammoth customer that could literally be their entire book of business, right? Like you got to be willing to slowly build traction with them and get them to believe in what you're saying. But so I did that. It took me about 3.5 years before I finally cracked this shipper. We got our first awards. We're excited. Everyone's like, yo, we're gonna be hauling for blah blah blah. Like, and then the storms hit in Texas, and in a matter of 24 hours, the rates went up 30%, and our freight was starting. It happened on a Friday. Monday, our rates all went live, and everything was 30% higher than what we had quoted. And you had just got done selling the customer on like, we stick to our rates, we service our freight, we're going to be the great partner. Thank you for bringing us on. Like everything is great. But shippers are smart enough to know that like, yeah, you're going to sell me on all of these things, and I'm believing what you're saying. That's why I'm taking a chance on you. But my perception of you actually starts all over again the day I send you a first load. And now we start all over again. And now I'm seeing if you're actually going to do what you say you're going to do. And so it was the worst timing in history of timing, probably. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but the storms hit. Shippers were shutting down. Rates went up 30%. We're getting all our contracted freight. We're bleeding cash within the first few weeks, probably $20,000, $30,000 in the red. But you have to keep servicing the loads, right? And so like any brokerage would already be like, ding, ding, ding. Like, man, that stinks. Like you should do something about that, or like go back to the customer and ask for more money or tell them. And we looked at it like, wait, no, we're not going to do that. Like, that's what everybody else would do. Why don't we like stay the course here and like commit to what we said we were going to do, and we'll dig ourselves out of this hole. And we lived up to our promises. And that catapulted into them needing more help on non-contracted freight. Right. And so we were, losing money on the contracted, but all of the spot and additional support that they needed because the other providers were maybe falling on their face or not picking up the freight. So that's your way to save the day. And so we looked at it like, hey, let's take care of this contracted. We'll crush it on spot, or, new opportunities, mini bids, whatever they have that's coming through the pipeline. And it turned into like, we became the household name that was like, who's the new kid on the block? Like not struggling when everyone's struggling. And I love these moments where you're hit with adversity and now you got to back it up. And so you fight through it. A year later, we probably cracked their top 10 in as largest brokerages, shipping, I don't know what the numbers were back then, 40, 50 loads a day by then, which is like unheard of in your first year with a new shipper, right? So it just was one of those stories that like I could tell that story to any shipper and they would be like, man, what would I have done in that moment? Or what were my carriers doing to me when that happened? They were doing the stuff that I hated and you weren't. And you tell that story and it's like real. They're like, man, so if that's how you guys do business, then I'll find a way to get you in my RFP, or I'll find a way to have you guys review a contract. And like those are, I mean, there's several other stories like that, but if you're a logistics manager and you can see the pedigree that somebody has and how they're going to handle adversity, of course they're going to be a good partner when it's like sunshine and rainbows outside, like picking up their loads and delivering it when the market's nice. And that's really the challenge in our industry, is that when the going gets tough, only I'm making up a number here, 5-10% of the carriers actually can stay the course and get through that challenging timeline and then tell a story to their customer like, hey, I'm going to stick with you through this. This is going to stink. I might need your help later on, but like I'm going to battle through this with you. And your customers like remember when you went through the struggle with them, and they like make you whole. Typically they'll make you whole. Some of them aren't the greatest, and we've all probably had some tough shippers, but for the most part, if you stuck to your guns and took care of them, they'll reciprocate. And so I always had that in my mind, like the long-term vision of these shippers, especially in the enterprise game, is not what we're doing for them this cycle or this year, right? If I want to haul for, I don't even know, I didn't even haul for General Mills or throw up a large logo, like I want to be hauling for them now and 10 years from now. So what I do right now in this year is just a blip on the radar when it comes to like a long-term partnership with, you know, Brenda, who's been in the VP of logistics for 30 years. If she knows that I'm going to stay the course and build with her long-term, like that's someone that they want to do business with. And you have to like establish the type of relationship you want to have with them. So anyways, I'm rambling, but like you can kind of get the idea. You can buy into like the type of relationship you want to have with shippers and how you're going to service them through volatility.
And I imagine that landing that big customer, going through those trials and tribulations, only helped to snowball the effect into landing more of those similar type of customers. Is that accurate?
Yes. And so then you're not talking about differentiators with those customers. You get on the phone with them. Obviously, you check the boxes, you know, API, EDI, modes of transportation, all the like basics that they require. But you're really just talking to them about like the type of provider you are, or the type of mindset you have, what partnerships, and like believing in each other and trust. And like, I have your back, you have my back. Sometimes I'll need to wave the white flag and need your help. Sometimes you'll need me to lower my rates because the market goes down. This is a win-win business. And like, if we stick to our partnership being really strong, like we can do this for a long time together. And like more times than not, talking to shippers like that, I found that was the easiest way to build relationships, because it was less about the X's and O's and less about the rate per mile or what load I shipped or region. It was more about the person on the other side of the phone, that I respected them. They took a shot on me getting in their network, and I need to live up to the promises. And they also, you know, if I do everything that I said I would, will you grow me, right? Like, will you continue to give me more business? And like, that's a relationship you have. And I started towards the end of my career being able to do that with several enterprise customers, because it wasn't so much about like all the bells and whistles and how great we are and this and that and all the buzzwords and the decks and this and like how great we recreated the wheel here, like we're the techiest. I pick up my loads and I deliver them, and I'm going to do it exactly the way you asked me to. And we're going to golf a couple times a year, and I'm going to make sure that I don't make you look bad in meetings. Cool. Can we keep doing that for the next 5-6 years? Awesome. And you're like my friend. Like that was like my style, and it worked.
Yeah, I could definitely see how that works, is especially because you're being honest with them from the jump, and you're getting the job done at the end of the day. I mean, you mentioned 96%, delivery rate, and that's what matters most to a lot of these guys is that, and gals, is that how can you create less problems for them so they don't have another manager, another, C-suite executive breathing down their neck because, supply chain
Yeah.
prices have increased dramatically again.
And I'll say another thing too, which again, I'm no longer a broker, so I can like unload the knowledge of things that I learned and along the way. I think people underestimate what perception that everyone on their team has on a customer's perception of you. So what I mean by that is sales rep or let's say C-suite at a brokerage lands a new logo and they're doing business with them. General consensus is like, oh, the relationship is with Stephan, Mathis, and whatever shipper. When the real relationship is the account manager, the accounting team, the operations teams, the load planners. That relationship is like 90% of it. Because if they are, on the same page with the other planners, their counterparts at the shipper, and everybody inside of that organization speaks highly of X carrier, their feedback goes up to the top inside of a shipper of like who their favorite carriers are. And so if they're always like, yeah, John at operations at MoLo is always on top, I love working with them. And then he says that to his VP, who's your favorite carrier? And they always are saying, so I always coached my team that like, it's not just me who has a great relationship with my guy who calls me. You guys all have to have great relationships with everybody you touch, every email you send, every shipping contact that, that you schedule a load with, or the accounting department. Everybody needs to be selling and like making a perception that we're the carrier that they should love working with, because they all have a perception or have a bad day when you sent the wrong email, you were in the wrong mindset, and that like quickly can escalate, or you didn't handle that problem load the right way. And then they're like, man, MoLo's like kind of stinking now. Like everyone's constantly taking a perception of you. And so I always was like, guys, if we're having our worst day, it doesn't matter. Let's just like always look like we're buttoned up. Even if you're struggling on this thing, perception is reality, and we have to control the narrative of what people think about us. And that's true sales when it comes to a brokerage. Because if you have a defense up where no one can penetrate, like getting thinking negative about you because you always like come through, then like, why wouldn't you get more business? You'd be hard to unseat at that point.
And so as it sounds like, in this moment of time, you're landing big enterprise customers, things are running like a well-oiled machine. How do you get to the point where you're like, I'm ready to leave. I'm ready to take a step back and try something new?
Yeah, it was kind of similar to the jump that I had before.
With Coyote and when they got bought out?
Yeah, I think I was like, I had accomplished everything that I wanted to I started as basically a carrier sales acumen, and ended up co-founding a company that got acquired and being our top sales rep. At the end, I managed 150 million in freight spend and was shipping 6,000 truckloads a month. I didn't know anywhere else. There wasn't anywhere else to go other than just keep doing more of that. And for me, I like to challenge myself. I like to keep accelerating and learning new things, whether it's about this industry or another industry. But truthfully, I got to a point where I felt like I accomplished everything I wanted to inside of MoLo and ArcBest, and I wanted to exit kind of gracefully and spend time with my family. And I had a baby on the way, and the timing was great because when we had started MoLo, I was 28 single with a dog, and when I ended, I had a baby on the way, a 1-year-old. I was building a house, and it was like, man, this is the right time. Like, let me pass the baton on. I've landed enough customers. My teams all feel really good. My customers love working with MoLo. Let me kind of do like a farewell and bow out and like feel good knowing that we worked really hard. And at the end, yeah, a lot of the customers were congratulatory, like saying like, man, it was awesome working with you. We'll keep working with them. Like, you know, we're cheering you on. We can't wait to see what's next for you. But I wanted to like exit and focus on family for a little bit before I figured out kind of what I want to tackle next. So
How did you? Because I sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, I sort of associate, I guess, my self-esteem with my work. And when some work in previous, career moves, when that work has been taken away from me, it's either pissed me off or it's made me really sad. How did you sort of like grieve that process of, this is one part of your life and now you're moving into the next? What did that process look like? Did you have an idea of what you wanted to sort of do next, or was it just embracing sort of the fear of the unknown?
I think it was bracing the fear of the unknown, and it was whatever I tackle next, I will be fine. You're nervous and you're fearful of learning something new or starting from scratch, but I always had this like, hey, everywhere I've ever gone, I was worried, but then I made it through the fire, and why would it change if whatever the next thing I put my mind to? So MoLo became my identity. So like when you started saying that, it was very challenging because that was like my heart was, I lived it, I breathed it. It was who I was as a person, but I also needed to like let go of that. Cause like at times it was unhealthy, like caring so much about something that like you are that person. And like, so that's something that I'm excited about whenever I jump on my next endeavor or on another team, is like also drawing a line between like work and like who I am outside of work. Cause like, I felt like I was a MoLo co-founder everywhere I went for like 6 years.
Yeah, it's
good
it's
and
really
bad. I mean,
hard.
it probably helped me in my sales perspective, but like it hurts you when you're only focused on that for so much of your life. So
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely life outside of the brokerage walls, and especially like as the industry is still going through so many changes and evolutions, it feels like it's happening faster than ever. We had a little bit of a boom over the last handful of years with sort of digital freight companies and digital freight brokerages. That's kind of maybe was, I don't want to say a flash in the pan, but some of that has fizzled out, obviously, with the convoy closure and the challenges around that space. But it also forced the industry to adapt more technology and really forced them to. So if you were to plan to start like a MoLo 2.0 or a freight brokerage in 2024, what would be those table stakes of how you would get a modern day freight brokerage started up from the ground up?
I think that I would actually do some customer feedback before I even like started. Like find out what customers truly want and what their pain points and experience that they've had, what they like, what they don't like, and kind of get enough of that before you jump into it. But I'm not someone who wants to rat on the digital broker thing. I think that Convoy and some of the other brokerages have really pushed the industry forward from a tech perspective, and it's it didn't fully work out for them at the end, but like we all had to get more tech efficiency focused. So from that perspective, I think that was a win for them. But yeah, I think ultimately a brokerage needs to be able to be efficiently moving the freight and also manage their costs at the same time, which shippers have no way of knowing if a brokerage is managing their cost effectively internally. They're like, you bid the freight and you move it at the rates you gave. So I think partnering with companies that allow you to, keep track of your overhead and make sure you're not over leveraging yourself in certain areas. You see the layoffs happening everywhere across the industry. It's terrible to see. A lot of that has to do with, some of the companies making a lot of money during the pandemic and overhiring. Some companies have such great talent that have been there for so long that they just can't pay them all anymore. And so those people will go and find other smaller companies and help build them out. And when the freight comes back, those companies will take off and grow. So I think it's like typically a 24 to 36 month cycle where like it keeps the freight keeps changing hands. The market will move forward from a tech perspective. The customer's expectations typically go up, but then there will be a market inflection. Something will happen that'll make it hard to move freight, and then you'll see who the true players are. And then typically the ones that could go back to just being pure brokers and taking care of the freight and not doing it in a fancy way will win. And that's why the names at the top of the list of the largest brokerages or the ones that maybe the top 100 haven't changed in years. Like it's the same brokerages who are doing a really good job and are the household names in the industry because they can figure out how to weather the storm and keep taking care of their customers. So
Kevin Hill of Brush Pass Research, he dropped some stats recently that said there are about 33% more freight brokerages today than there were compared to 2019. And I'm curious, especially with combining the technology aspect of it too. Do you think shippers are overwhelmed with all the freight tech solutions and freight brokerages just in general, or are they welcoming of sort of these new advancements and these new ways of doing business?
I don't think they're welcoming of it. I think that it is when they take a chance on someone who has a new way of doing it and it works, then they might be more open to it. But a lot of the shippers they just trust what they know. And if this works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of the old adage, but it eventually will continue to change. If someone is working and doing really well with a new technology or something, then that shipper talks to the next one's like, these guys are doing this. We like this about them. You should use them. And then it starts spiraling. And then before you know it, the brokerage community is like, well, we all have to use this thing now because the shippers have said this is the thing. But I don't think that that's out there today. There's a lot of technology that for back-end brokerage support or in-house everyone's doing something to help the brokerage better. And I think there's kind of a lacking in technology for the overall space in specifically to the customers and how they make decisions about who and why and what and who's moving the freight and why. And I think that there's kind of opportunities in the space from that perspective and just the overall experience from brokerage to customer. The industry needs more people working on it. I said this on Nathan Schute's podcast. There needs to be people working on the industry regardless of what's going on in it. Like the freight's moving, fine, but like who's making it a better place to work in and thinking about like solving problems over here while they're not running around moving loads. Like, because that's like, you're not fully giving 100% towards the problems when you're spending time moving the loads. And so that's the challenge as a brokerage. If you're moving $500 million worth of freight, how much time do you have to actually go and like automate and change something over here? Like someone else needs to do that then for you. And so I think that the industry is ripe for continuous disruption, but not like in the techie convoy kind of like mindset of disrupting brokerages, but more disrupting from a place of like technology that could advance the experience or efficiency from both the customer all the way through the brokerage. And so I'm fascinated by what the future looks like for that, and could see myself trying to tackle a few of the problems that I've seen over time.
So if you are a broker and you're just getting started, maybe you work at a small company, maybe you work at a large company, what kind of advice or tips would you give to those brokers who are struggling to get that new business and are, not having the emails answered or the phone calls answered and they're getting ignored? And would that advice be different, large versus small brokerage?
Yeah, I think you have to go through that challenging period where you're on the phones, you're hustling and bustling. Like that's part of being a broker, and you have to kind of cut your teeth on that. But my advice for them would be to find their genuine voice of who they are and think about putting themselves in the shipper's shoes of like the type of person that they would want to work with or trust their freight with, and then start mirroring your sales pitch on yourself or on them as if like you're trying to be the person who's a good sales, like don't be the person who's blowing them up constantly. Like they hate that. At this point, like there's enough information out there of like what you shouldn't do to like piss a shipper off. And if you are still doing those things, like you're the broker they hate. Let's just be real. And the second piece of that, I would say, yeah, be genuine, be authentic, show who you are, be vulnerable, because the reality of this industry is it's all about relationships and it's all about trust. And it doesn't matter. You look back 10 years from now or 10 years further, it's always going to be like the experience you had with the person, and you'll rather trust that person than someone new who you've never heard of. And so the second part of that, I would say, is like building your personal brand, building your own, whether it's on your LinkedIn or maybe it's in your emails when you're reaching out. Have something that they can follow along with you and get to know you as a person. Because a lot of times these shippers are choosing to work with the person that they could see themselves like having a good relationship with too, which like you could be the best broker in the world, but if you stink at like relationships or you struggle with that part, like eventually they won't want to work with you, even though like your company is so good. And so I think it benefits everybody to work on their LinkedIn, talking about freight, talking about whatever it is that they do, gaining a following, because whether or not you are getting traction from the customer, like, they're responding to your emails, if you follow them or post on LinkedIn, or maybe you connected with them on LinkedIn, they can still indirectly see your content and they can make a perception of the type of person that you are. Are you the type of sales rep that I'd want to do business with, or following your company? And the same, and again, with that, same goes with the companies, right? Like they should have their own LinkedIn branding and putting the type of energy into the world, that how they do business, so that shippers can see that and kind of put themselves in the shoes of like if they were working with you, which is important.
Yeah, I 100% co-sign that you should actually be building, that personal brand and using social media as a digital handshake. But I have heard from so many different, brokers and freight marketers that they've lost their job if they start personally branding themselves out on social media, because the owners or the C-suite, they get scared that, that they're going to be bigger than the company, or they're going to misrepresent the company. So they discourage their employees from actively building out in public, building on social media. So what would you say to some of those companies who are forbidding their employees from building up that brand and that authenticity and trust?
I think all pub is good pub for the most. Typically, I think I got that from a movie at some point, or someone made that quote. But like, if your employees enjoy working at your company and they're putting their information out in the world and like people get to follow them, that's a direct reflection on more exposure to inbound interest in your company, not from just like a shipper perspective or a carrier perspective, but also from like potential employees, right? Like if I'm a entry level, or let's say a mid-level sales rep at a mid-sized brokerage, and I'm posting on my LinkedIn about sales or what I like to do in my free time, or challenges or hurdles or things that I've done in my career, and other sales reps from other companies see that, John Smith loves working at blah, blah, blah carrier. They all are looking at that and seeing like, oh, he really likes his job over there. Like maybe I would want to work there. And it's like a talent pool. I think individual brands, personal brands for employees, it helps and catapults a brand, the company's brand. So I think it's good to keep doing that and pushing them. And then if they're the ones that are saying not to do that, are they doing it themselves? Because they're probably not. which like they should be the ones out there also. If they're the CEO or C-suite or VPs, they need to be putting information out there for other people to catch on and like start telling their story. I think everyone has this like natural like pushback against social media because they see so much of it already. And I'm not that type of person or this or that, but like, how do you expect people to learn about you? Right? Other than just you cold blowing them up in emails and calls and stuff. And like, is that how you would want to find out? You kind of want to like indirectly find out about how somebody is. Like, you know, maybe they went to a ball game on the weekend. They post a picture about it with one of their carriers or their customer. And then you're like, oh, I know so-and-so at that shipper, you know, like they went to a ball game together. Maybe they are someone I should consider. Like, right. Like you can start to like put yourself in the shoes, but you'll never get any of that attention if you're not using the social media to your advantage.
Yeah, I definitely co-sign there. I think it's very short-sighted for a lot of these, you know, I guess sort of company leaders to prohibit their employees from, I get it from the sense of like, you don't want them commenting on, you know, say, we used to have a rule, anything that has to do with sex, politics, or religion, just steer clear from. Everything else is safe. And so as long as you're following those like very loose guidelines, then there's really no reason to be that worried about your company or your, you know, employees promoting the company, unless they're revealing, you know, sort of sensitive information, which hopefully they're not dumb enough to do that. But if they do, that's a situation that you cross that bridge when it happens. But you don't need to worry yourself about, you know, things that haven't necessarily happened yet. And for folks who are maybe working in, you know, those environments, I would highly encourage you to still build that brand separately. And then that way you can have something to fall back on, or just, I mean, it's much simpler. It's easier said than done, but go work for another company that actually values some of those talents.
And if you're a sales rep or an employee at one of these companies, you need to do it because that's your personal brand. Doesn't necessarily need to mean like you are who you are outside of that company too, and you might not work there forever. And if they get butthurt about that, you can say like, hey, like I might work here for 3-4 years, but like I want to build my personal brand up and my LinkedIn following. Maybe I'm working somewhere else in 5 years. Like I want there to be a following of people who know who I am. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I'm an individual, you know, like, and stand up for yourself. And if you have a problem with that, like maybe it's not the company to work at.
Yeah, that's a real quick way to find out if that company is a good fit for you or not long term. And so as you know sort of shifted into you call yourself a free agent right now. You're not ready to talk about the things that you're working on. Of course, I'm sure that will come a little bit later on. But I'm curious as to how you're thinking about marketing yourself right now. You know, I've seen you on a couple of different podcasts. Obviously, we're recording one right now. How do you think about your personal brand right now and what you're building towards?
Yeah, I think I'm really just putting out my story and building up, kind of what the back end of what I've done so far in the industry, building a following of industry peers, getting to connect with people who are doing some cool stuff, and like being on your podcast or being in the founders, group with Nathan, and getting to hear other people's stories. And like the more I get out there and be exposed, I'm meeting some really cool people that I was like sheltered from it because I was so focused on just MoLo, or customer. I was in the weeds and I didn't see the world going around me of like, wow, this like space is massive and there's a lot of other stuff going on. So I think it helps to be a kind of like a connector and being in different spaces and that kind of allows you to open up doors that could potentially be a new career path or a potential partner one day. If you have your own company, they might be a vendor of yours. Like you just never know. And so I'm really just putting out there the energy. I'm trying to help as many people as I can, connecting. I don't have an ask today because I'm not actively working, but building a brand of my own following, staying active in the space. And, at some point I'll pop up and do something that I'm inspired by. And hopefully some of the following that I have might be future customers or people that I can help. And that's the way I look at it.
And so, I think this is a perfect segue into, the final segment that I like to have with each of our guests that come on the show. It's more of like marketing and sales, like rapid fire. We're already talking about marketing and sales. So I would love to get into, you've already kind of answered, some of the first, for people who listen regularly. I do have a certain amount of questions that I ask, but I'm not going to repeat those in case you've already answered them. And that first one is, how do you think about marketing when it comes to you and your company? You've definitely answered that, I think, throughout this entire show. But this next one is, what's your favorite social media platform and why?
I'm a big Instagram follower.
Really?
I don't do a lot of content on there. I don't think in the logistics space now it's growing on there, but I don't know if a lot of shippers are on Instagram from that perspective. They're kind of using it more as their way to just be themselves and be away from it. But like my favorite would be LinkedIn by far. LinkedIn is it's the place where you can really truly connect and network with people and like see what's going on, whether it's in the industry or internally at companies, what people care about. You can see the following. You can see who you should connect with to be in certain types of groups, or it's wide open, and you can see I wouldn't call them influencers, but there's a lot of people doing really well on LinkedIn alone, just monetizing their audience. And that's a whole other part of this too. I wouldn't say necessarily in the logistics space you need that, but it does behoove you to have a presence on there and be well known and be someone that could be in any room and someone knows your story. That's a step, right? And like, and I think about it too from a place of like, if you wanted to have a new job and you were connected with like 500 of the same people, chances are those people wouldn't be connected with you if you were not a great person, right? Like they wouldn't want to be following you or whatnot. So you kind of get like instant credibility of like connected with all these really cool people that I also trust. I should probably give this person a chance. Or you could ask that person, what do you think of them, right? Like, so I definitely would say LinkedIn is massive, and it's going to keep growing.
For sure. It's definitely, I think, a unicorn in the logistics space. I think X is kind of formerly Twitter is growing a little bit. It's still there. I just feel I have a deep fear of like what the rest of 2024 is going to do to Twitter itself and like the psyche of a lot of the crazy users of that platform. But it is starting to really grow from a logistics standpoint. There's a lot of folks that you can connect with on there. But to your point about Instagram, I don't know how many shippers are actively on X. So right now, LinkedIn is really the best bet for a lot of us that are looking to build up your personal brand. And you had mentioned earlier about, being, kind of in the MoLo circle. And so you didn't know about some of these other things that are going on within the industry, and you're finding a lot of excitement about learning about them. And so one of our next questions is, what is your favorite SaaS tool that you use, or maybe you've seen within the industry that you would either want to purchase or that you can't live without?
Man, that's a good question. I can't think of one right now, and that's partially why I think that I want to go into SaaS. I don't want to label one. I think there's some great up and coming, I'll say, Carrier Sure and Highway and Good Ship, and there's a bunch of companies out there that are doing some good things that we need in the space to tackle a specific problem. But yeah, I'm not bullish on any one brand quite yet. I think the space is wide open, and there are challengers that could come in and do something great that could easily take the reins and run with it.
And so
the brokerage community is so competitive. It is like, it's beyond competitive. The tech space is like wide open.
That's actually a really good point. I haven't thought about it that way.
There's like 20 companies in the tech space that are trying to do something great, and there's 28,000 brokerages.
To look for the opportunity is what you're saying.
Yeah. So where can you compete, right?
What is you might have already answered this question, but what is your favorite freight business that isn't your own or formerly of your own?
The first one that came to mind was Candor Expedite down in Dallas. I think they're in Dallas, DFW market.
Dallas, Texas. Nicole Glenn, former guest of this show.
Nicole Glenn. Yeah, she's the real one. She was the reason I left Coyote and got out of and found MoLo. She bet on me. She pulled me out of there and said, you can do bigger things. And I took a chance. So definitely Nicole Glenn. I have a picture wearing a Candor Expedite shirt from like 4 years ago because she had that phase where she left and went and built her own company and went through that whole phase. And now she's doing really well. Woman-owned company,
Ladies Leadership Coalition. She's got the podcast going on.
I get inspired by people who do good things, big things in this industry and bet on themselves and wear their heart on their sleeve. Like, so she's someone that I look up to and I respect. So I'm rooting for Candor Expedite for sure.
Heck yeah. Great choice. All right. Next one on the list is, what is a book or podcast that has changed your perspective on something you used to think?
I do listen to the Ed Milet show quite often. He's a kind of, how do you say it the right way? Like he's like self-help coach and like bettering yourself. And he's one of the leading influencers in that space. I think he's like number one coach for just like pushing yourself to that you can reach a higher potential. He interviews some of the best people that can help you, tackle problems or challenges that you're going through, and like mindset. And I'm a big believer of like, it's like what you say to yourself when you're internally that actually like is how you live your world. So like I've been working on my internal voice of like, you can do it, go do it. And what's the other one? Oh, this book right here is really good. Be Useful by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, I've heard good things about it.
He is just like, I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent. He has his flaws, so I'll say a disclaimer, but the guy has won at every level and everything he's ever tried because he never was scared and always went for it 100% effort. And like, I respect that when you like don't look back and you just say, I'm going to do this thing and it has to work. And like the guy has lived like an unbelievable life of like every challenging thing that he has attempted to do, he's accomplished. And I think that like by the end of the race, when you're on your deathbed, you want to tell a story of like, man, I tried everything that I ever wanted to, and I'm tired. And I think more people need to go out there and bet on themselves and try really hard things or the thing that they obsess over, and push themselves. So
that's a really, I would say that's a perfect place to end it. And I might, sort of kick myself a little bit here because I do have one more question, and we typically save this one for the last, but it's really, it's kind of challenging to answer, but it sounds easy, but it's also challenging to answer. But what is your favorite supply chain or logistics fact, or maybe one reason why you love this industry?
The fact that helped me the most closing shippers was that 93% of the trucks on the actual road have less than two. I think 93% of the fleets on the road have less than 2 trucks. And when you think about that, and when a shipper is going to tell you, oh, I only work with asset-based carriers, I'm like, okay, so you only want to work with 7% of the carriers then in the industry. Got it. I know you. That's false. So let's talk real here. You need brokers to work and haul your freight, right? Like, and I landed some awesome shippers by like telling them like, working with a broker isn't necessarily about broker versus asset. It's about your ability to gain access to capacity. And so if you're going to just say you want large assets, like you're going to, okay, great. Go after the 7% that everyone else wants for them to haul perfectly for you. And that's just not the reality of how the freight moves in this industry. So that would be my quote.
Yeah, that's a really good one, and I think that's going to be a soundbite to start off the episode. So, Stephan, anything that you feel is important to mention that we haven't already talked about?
I am open to continuing to connect with people who are forward thinking, maybe contrarian thinkers. I want to keep learning and networking with people who want to move this industry forward. I will be working on something that's a solo project of my own. So excited for that to gain progress, but just in general, like, yeah, I'm rooting for the industry to keep moving forward and hoping that the layoffs aren't everyone lands on soft landing and hopefully the market picks up so that everybody can make a little money.
Yeah. That I think everybody is in agreement with that. So great stuff, Stephan. Where can folks follow you, follow more of your work, stay connected? So when you do have that big announcement, that they can all, sort of follow along and cheer along.
Yeah. So StephanMathis.com. I created just a landing branding page of just a little bit of what I did at MoLo and kind of thinking forward ahead. My LinkedIn page is pretty active on there. There's a Calendly link if they want to connect with me and just, meet or discuss anything. I'm kind of open right now because I'm at home with my kids. So, but yeah, that's really the spot. It's just my personal website right now.
Well, perfect. I think this was a freight sales masterclass for this episode, and I think that's going to be the title of the episode for a lot of folks who may be struggling out there. Hopefully, you listen and take a lot of this advice. But Stephan, thank you again for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, be authentic. Don't try to sound like you know everything about everything. Just be yourself. That's half the battle. I'll live on that. How about that?
Well said.